People in our own backyards are hurting. There are insecurities around food, economics, mental health, access to justice, healthcare, and our society continues to become more divisive. But there is hope. Right here in Chicagoland, there are people and organizations who are on the front lines, working to bring about positive and transformative change. Each week, we're going to meet some of these agents of change and examine how they are spurring innovative ideas and finding solutions to push our society forward in a more just direction. I'm Sufyan Sohel, and this is Change Agents. Mental health is a state of well-being that enables people to cope with the stresses of life, realize their abilities, learn and work well, and to contribute to their community. It is an integral component of health and well-being that underpins our individual and collective abilities to make decisions, build relationships, and to shape the world we live in. Some statistics for you. 1 in 5 Americans will experience mental health challenges this year, and 40% experience mental health challenges sometime in their lifetime. 13.4% of the U.S. population identifies as Black or African American. Of those, over 16% reported having a mental illness over the past year. That is over 7 million Americans. 40 to 60% with need do not get treatment. People in the Black community are 50% less likely to not get treatment. Black Americans, specifically Black women, face significant disparities in mental health care. They historically have faced social and racial injustices and are statistically some of the most disadvantaged people in the United States, often simultaneously experiencing racism, sexism, financial insecurity, and community violence. To speak about this more is our first guest today, clinical psychologist, assistant professor of Northwestern University School of Medicine, and author of Nobody Knows the Trouble I've Seen, Dr. Inger Burnett Ziegler. Dr. Burnett Ziegler, thank you so much for having us today. May I call you Inger?
Of course. Thank you for having me.
My pleasure. So let's just jump right in. Black women experience higher levels of mental health conditions, but they also are less likely to receive treatment. Can you talk a little bit more about this, please?
Sure. We know this is greatly due to the disproportionate burden of stress experienced by Black women. We know that Black women experience more stress related to employment and employment instability, related to finances, poverty, racism, sexism, as you mentioned, also family health and community violence. We also know that stress is very closely linked to mental health challenges as well as physical health challenges. This stress can lead to conditions like depression, anxiety, things like community violence and exposure to gun violence and even sexual violence can lead to traumatic stress. And so by carrying that disproportionate burden of stress, Black women are at greater risk for mental health conditions.
And what about the treatment? Why are they receiving much less treatment than other communities maybe?
There's, for a long time, been stigma against mental health treatment in the Black community. There's been this kind of saying that, you know, we don't need mental health care. We should be able to be strong and be able to take care of our own problems. And I think that that's in part due to many Black women not talking about the emotional challenges that they're experiencing, kind of putting on this facade that everything is okay, when so many people are really struggling on the inside. Additionally, we know that it's really hard for people to get connected to providers, particularly if they're looking for other providers of color. And there's a lot of worry about, you know, being judged, being not understood, being misunderstood by a potentially a white provider. And all of these things can be barriers to Black women getting the help that they need.
Thank you for sharing that. I remember in my more misspent youth when I really felt I needed to see a mental health professional, my parents would say the same thing. We don't share our problems. We deal with this internally, or that's not a big deal, suck it up, get over it. And in reading your book, in a lot of the stories that I read, that felt like a common theme across many of the stories that you shared.
Absolutely. In fact, in the book, I talk about a story of my own from childhood where I felt that I, needed therapy. And I went to my parents and I said, I think we need to go to family therapy. And they said that must be something that, you picked up from the white kids at school, which actually was true. I heard other people in my mixed school environment talking about going to therapy, and they looked like they were well adjusted and that it was helpful for them. And so I brought this idea home to my parents, and they laughed it off and said, you're fine, you don't need help, and just kind of dismissed the idea.
And how did that make you feel at that time?
It made me feel unseen, really, because I was a child that was really full of angst. I had periods of depression, I had periods of anxiety. There were things that I didn't understand in my household that I really wanted to talk about and kind of sort out. And, when I brought this up, it just made me feel dismissed and didn't have an outlet to be able to talk about the things that were happening in my mind.
This theme of the we aren't enough, is that, and you mentioned that a couple times throughout the book, is that something that you experienced? And can you expand a little bit more on that?
Yeah, I think, often in the Black community, there's this pressure to present your best self, to be a good representative, to kind of show up and be a good model for other people and represent our community well.
Sure.
And that pressure can at times, feel like a burden. And it can, really weigh people down. And, that is something that I certainly experienced, this pressure for perfectionism that often, really led to a lot of anxiety and feeling like I wasn't good enough, that nothing, would ever, really be enough, and kind of beating myself up and carrying that pressure. And another thing that I talk about in the book was how yoga actually was really transformational for me in that sense, and kind of letting go of those personal pressures, those family pressures, community pressures, and really just honoring myself as it is, allowing myself to just be without the pressure to be able to have to do and perform in a certain way all of the time.
Interesting, and thank you for sharing that. Something I've been thinking about a lot recently, and it got, the book helped me frame it a little bit better, was generational trauma. You share the story of your grandmother, then your mother, and how that trickled to you. Can you talk a little bit about that and how it led to you in your current career?
Yeah, I have to say that learning more about my grandmother and my mother's stories was one of my best gifts of going through the journey of writing this book. Of course, I knew my grandmother to be a strong Black woman. I knew my mother to be a strong Black woman, and both of them have been incredible models for me that I looked up to in childhood and even in adulthood. But it was diving into wanting to tell this story through the book that I understood more about the challenges that my grandmother and my mother had gone through that I really didn't know about and that weren't talked about. I didn't know that my grandmother had had multiple miscarriages. I didn't know about the abuse that she experienced in her marriage. I didn't know about the poverty and racism and discrimination that she experienced. I didn't know the things that my mom experienced in her relationship with her mother, some of the tension there, as well as the relationship in her father, and the remnants of that pass on from my grandmother to my mother and my mother to me. And one of the things that I really wanted to show in the book is that by telling these stories, by recognizing the trauma that has shown up in people's lives and being able to identify it, and importantly, being able to identify how it shows up in your individual life, that's how we can kind of take control and write a new story. We have to be able to see our own trauma and see how we're behaving from a place of trauma in order to carve out a new course.
Thank you so much, and thank you for sharing the stories of your grandmother and mother with such authenticity and candor. And it was really great to read and just see, knowing you, how those experiences shaped you. Let's talk about this generational trauma. Is that a factor that you see in a lot of the clients you're working with? And is that prohibitive, perhaps, of them seeking mental health because they think it's just a part of their story.
Yeah, I want to start just by kind of defining one of the ways generational trauma can show up. One of the classic examples that I see, particularly in my therapy practice, is someone who, for example, might have witnessed their mother being abused in their household. And then they leave that relationship, usually as a teenager, to escape the trauma that's happening in the household. And they then end up in a relationship in which there is intimate partner violence. In that relationship of intimate partner violence, a child is born, and that child then witnesses the same type of violence happening between their parents. And often these situations are kind of embedded in poverty, as well as in community violence. And so there's trauma happening in the house, and often trauma happening in the community and the neighborhood as well. To take that, a step further is, for so many people, that's so common that they're not calling it trauma, right? And so they're not able to say, the way that I saw my parents talking to each other was harmful, and that has impacted me. The neighborhood that I lived in had my mom afraid for my safety all of the time, and that impacted the way that she parented me, and now I'm afraid all of the time. And so, yes, the majority of the women that come into my practice have experienced some sort of trauma. We know that Black women have higher rates of trauma than white women, and often it's not identified. And so the work that we do is to kind of be able to peel back the layers, to understand where some of these unhealthy messages that are rooted in trauma come from, and to be able to create new, healthier behaviors and healthier ways that women talk to themselves in a way that's more compassionate and healthy for their well-being.
Thank you so much for sharing that. To sit tight, we'll be right back and be joined by Mark Ishaug, CEO of Thresholds.
Hi, I'm Michelle Skinner.
I'm Angelique David.
And I'm Robin McFarland. You can think of me as the Beyonce of the group.
Each week, Real Talk with Just for Girlfriends will serve up fun, facts, and real conversation for the soul.
We'll be joined by an incredible array of guests exploring issues and topics designed to enlighten, entertain, and sometimes even unnerve.
Real Talk with Just for Girlfriends airs Mondays on Can TV 19 and streaming on cantv.org.
And we're back with Mark Ishaug, CEO of Threshold, and Dr. Burnett Ziegler, board member of Thresholds. Mark, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. It's so great to be here with my wonderful board member.
Yes, pleasure to have you both. Can you tell us a little bit about Thresholds?
Sure. Thresholds was founded in 1959 to provide home, health, and hope to people with serious mental illnesses. And that's what we've done for over 60 years. We help those that have been institutionalized in hospitals and nursing homes, in jail and prisons, and in the institution of homelessness. And what we do with our 1,200 amazing staff is try to change the trajectory of people's lives by providing home, health, and hope.
That's so wonderful. I went on your website earlier today and saw all of these different services, from substance use treatment, intensive outreach for mental health, crisis response, deaf program, justice program, veterans project, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's so great what you're all doing. Do you feel you're able to change this conversation or change even the approach to mental health?
Well, yeah, I think we've had such a huge impact, just the tens of thousands of lives that we have changed. People who didn't think they could ever live on their own, for example, or ever graduate from college or ever hold a job. And we have proven year after year that with people, when they get the right treatment, when they have the right psychologist and the right case manager and the right support, they can turn their lives around, the right medication, et cetera. But yeah, we've had a huge, huge impact. The challenge we have in the public mental health sector is that there's never been enough money to do what we need to do. And combined with the workforce challenge that we have today, it's like this double whammy. So I have to say, last year we had a huge success in Springfield. We led a major year-long campaign to put hundreds of millions of new dollars into community mental health. So we're hoping that's going to make a huge difference.
That's so great. But that's a new win for you.
That's a new win.
What's it been like in the past?
It's been really, really tough. there's never been an investment in this country, not just in Illinois, but in this country, in community mental health. I don't know why people decided a long time ago that the brain is not part of the body, but I think that's created a bifurcated dual system of healthcare. But what we say all the time at Thresholds, and I know that my friend and board member agree, mental health care is healthcare. And we're working really hard to change that conversation so that we can reduce stigma and allow people to talk about mental health. The only way that we're going to address mental health and create better mental well-being is to eradicate stigma and to help people be comfortable saying that it's okay not to be okay, or I'm not okay and that's okay, and I'm going to seek help.
Absolutely. So we talked about stigmas. In your book, Dr. Ziegler, you have this concept of learned helplessness. You talk about individuals dealing with chronic abuse who become more vulnerable to a learned helplessness. Now, Thresholds, from my understanding, works with a lot of community members who are marginalized or vulnerable. Is this a prevalent theme of learned helplessness with the people you're serving?
When people face stressor after stressor, challenge after challenge, repeatedly are exposed to traumas, there can be this sense that no matter what I do, it's going to be hard for me to move through or get over. And sometimes that experience of, kind of white knuckling it through life can lead to this feeling of helplessness or learned helplessness, where there is a sense that sometimes people feel like giving up. They either feel like giving up or they just don't know what that next step is to take. And that's some of the work that I know that the Thresholds team does, is to help people kind of tap back into that inner strength to be able to take those next steps. And that's some of the work that I do as a clinician and therapist as well, is to be able to kind of help people dig out of that sense of stuckness, to be able to find that inner ability to see that light at the end of the tunnel, outside of that darkness that those challenges can often bring.
Wonderful.
When I think about our clients, we call them members, I think about their resilience and I think about their strength. They have survived, if not thrived, in a world where the systems have been stacked against them. From the child welfare systems to the police systems to the systems that support institutionalization. And the fact that our tens of thousands of clients over the years exhibit resilience and not just survival, but are thriving, with the right supports, with the love. I talk about love a lot at Thresholds because I think that's like so core to who we are and what we do. But watching our clients empower themselves. I feel like we're on this journey with them, but this is their journey. And our role is to meet them where they're at in any stage of this journey, and to do what they want to do and to help them achieve their goals. One of the things I love about Thresholds is when we meet people, if they're on the street or if they're in an institution, we don't say, we're here to provide mental health services to you. We're here to save you. Not at all. The questions we ask them is like, what do you want? What's important to you? And what's the first thing that you need in your life to take you to a better place? And for a lot of our folks, it's food. It's like having access to food, nutritional food. It's being reconnected with somebody in their family that they love and that they miss. It's about finishing high school or getting into college. And all of these things combined are sort of what propel people on the path to what I like to think of as mental well-being.
So what do you do when they say, I want food, or I need a house, or my kid needs a new backpack?
We get right to it. We figure out with our food pantry partners and with SNAP benefits how we can get people the food and nutrition services they need. If it's housing, which is really tough in a place like Chicago, we work in overtime to find people housing. Sometimes it's a SRO, sometimes it's a hotel room. Yeah, I'm so glad you brought up housing, because for people that we serve that are the most marginalized, the most discriminated against, housing's the core. When I talk about Thresholds, I use the term home, health, and hope, and I often say it starts with home. Because without housing, without safe, affordable housing, and a place where you can rest your head every night and get a good night's sleep, almost everything else really seems impossible.
Absolutely. Let's talk about another vulnerable group, those that are in our prison and jail systems. This mental health is disproportionately represented of those in jail. I believe, I may have read in your book that Cook County Jail is the largest mental health provider in the nation. But also, those in our prison systems are receiving less adequate healthcare services. What is Thresholds doing in that space, and is there room for improvement?
Oh, there's so much room for improvement. I mean, and what we try to do is try to keep people out of that system.
Sure.
Because once you enter the justice system, it has a long-term negative impact, no matter how short your stay in there. So really everything that we do is trying to keep people out of that system. But so many people end up in that system, often for crimes of survival. A mental health condition has caused them to engage in some kind of behavior that they might not have engaged in otherwise. But often people are arrested and serve, time for just really trying to survive. And then on the other side, we really are working hard with the Department of Corrections and with Cook County Jail, so that when people are coming out of these institutions, they can get a warm handoff to a place like Thresholds or one of our partners. Because the worst thing that you can do, getting out of jail or prison, that's a good thing, but just giving a bus pass or less and saying good luck is not the answer. So we know that we need to continue to build up a robust system of community providers all over the state to be there and to have the resources to bring people back into the community.
Sure. Thank you. For both of you, what are some of the, mental health challenges is something that's not always visibly seen. We don't know what people are experiencing. What are some of the biggest misconceptions that people may have of those experiencing some of these things?
You started the show tonight with some statistics, and I think one of the biggest misconceptions is not realizing how many people experience stress, depression, and anxiety. Sure. I think people often also don't understand the ways that some of the signs and symptoms can creep into your daily life, can show up in your physical body, can show up in the ways that your behavior changes, the way you interact with friends and family, the way that you're able to perform at work, the way you might start to slack off on some of your day-to-day responsibilities. And these things can lead to incremental changes that, when left unattended to, can have really big consequences. And I think that for that reason, it's really important to not only address preventative mental health care, but to also be promoting our mental wellness on an ongoing basis, even if we're not currently in a period of stress or distress.
One of my heroes besides Inger in this sector is a doctor named Colleen Cicchetti from Lurie Children's Hospital. And I've done a lot of work with her. She's really a luminary in the space on children and adolescents. But one thing that she says all the time that just so resonates with me is that, and you probably have heard her say this, we can't mental health our way out of this mental health crisis. Meaning that great places like Thresholds and Trilogy and C4 and Rosecrans, all these great providers, we have a huge role to play, but we can't do it on our own. This takes all of us to mental health our way out of a mental health crisis, to create mental well-being. It's schools, it's churches, it's synagogues, it's mosques, it's community groups.
Absolutely.
It's reforming the way policing is done in Chicago. It's corporate Chicago and what they have to do to be responsible to their workforce. So I think that's just really important for this audience, to be thinking about that this is about all of us. There's a huge role for places like Thresholds, but we are only going to thrive if the whole ecosystem really embraces this concept of mental well-being, because it's a cliche that it takes all of us, but it's the truth. It takes absolutely all of us.
Thank you for that. Mark, you're a few years younger than me, and you spent 12 and a half years at the AIDS Foundation of Chicago.
20 years.
10 and a half years now at Thresholds, right? 10 and a half. 20 years at AIDS Foundation?
20 years at the AIDS Foundation.
What inspires you to keep working on behalf of all these social causes, and to keep changing the conversation of how we talk about some of these things?
Well, it is the greatest privilege in the world to be able to do that, the work that I do at Thresholds, and for 20 years before at the AIDS Foundation of Chicago. You know, I'm just lucky. I use the L word all the time to describe.
Love.
Well, I use love all the time
lucky
too.
too. Okay.
That's right, L. I'm the love guy. But I actually have added luck to my my speech on L's. I have a great speech on L's that I should give sometime. You know,
Please.
all the stuff that really makes us
We'll have
such
you on here
wonderful
again
human
to give that
beings,
speech.
looking and listening and leaning on and leaning in, and of course lunch. But I talk about love and luck a lot, and you know, I'm so blessed, right? I learned to be an activist at a really young age because my mom was fighting redlining in Chicago, and you know, work in school and world hunger and work in Africa. All of that sort of led me to this, what I think of social justice work. When I love Thresholds because we provide direct client services and we're changing individual lives. But what I also love is that we're changing systems. Like, I wake up every day saying the mental health system in Illinois, it's good or pretty good, but it needs to be great. Yeah. And together we can go from good to great. You know, we can change systems, we can change rules, we can change laws. And that really inspires me. Because I think, you know, I guess I'm a sociologist at heart. We have a psychologist here. And, you know, I think about the social determinants of health and mental health. And that's what I get up every day and fight for. But it's a privilege. I recognize my privilege. But mostly I'm just so excited that I get to work with people like Inger and frankly you, and I know you're the host and I should not say that to you, but you know, the next generation of leaders are the ones that are going to take us from where we are at today to a much, much better place. So I have enormous gratitude for the two of you.
Thank you so much, Mark, for sharing those words, and thank you and Inger for joining us today on Change Agents. And we'll be right back with this week's Change in Action.
Chicagoland is filled with unique perspectives on culture and life. Each week on For the Culture, we'll delve into those perspectives with dynamic guests and engaging conversations covering a variety of topics. From panel discussions to one-on-one in-depth exchanges, we are going to unpack some of the issues and narratives unique to the Chicagoland area. From arts and entertainment, to business, to trending news, to diversity, equity, and inclusion, we'll get into it here on For the Culture. Hyperlocal television designed to inform, empower, engage, and activate. For the Culture airs Tuesdays at 7 p.m. on Cant TV 19 and streaming on cantv.org.
For today's Change in Action, I would like to introduce you to Samantha Mormino, the Southwest team leader for Threshold's Homeless Outreach Program. Samantha, a licensed social worker, has been working with our homeless communities for the past 3 years, and with Threshold for the past 3 months. She and her team act as the first line of engagement and support for their members, individuals of our communities that are homeless, living in shelters, or in inadequate housing, and whom are experiencing mental health challenges. She lives with the idea that given support and linkages to services, people can thrive and lead a life of stability and validation. Samantha loves collaborating with those she serves and is grateful to be able to see the impact of her team's work. Thank you, Samantha, for living this change through your service. Our communities are facing so many issues. Some, like mental health, are not always visible. Thank you again to Inger and Mark for joining us today and sharing more about your invaluable work. My friends, there are so many ways, both big and small, in which you and I can bring positive change into the lives of our neighbors and the communities around us. I urge us all to look inside ourselves and to find something bigger to be a part of or to give back to. Each of us have the power to make a difference. Let us all be change agents. I look forward to seeing you all next week.